One of the ambitions of the Obama administration has been to turn America's focus away from the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan and turn our attention to East Asia and the Pacific, where American economic and trade and financial interests have been growing dramatically over the last 20 years, but that area has not received the kind of attention that we have typically put into the North Atlantic community or the Middle East elsewhere. And that was a way to make themselves different from the Bush administration. And to a large extent, they've been good at following through on this effort. Mrs. Clinton, as Secretary of State, threw herself into it. And this year, this autumn, is the chance the administration has to put a lot of what it's done over the last 3 years on display. The U.S. has, in rotation, become host of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, which is going to have a leaders meeting from the 21 member states in Honolulu, President Obama's home state. And then onto that, they have added a fill-in trip, which has been long overdue, by the president as a state visitor to Australia. And then they're going to go from Australia to Bali, Indonesia, where Indonesia is the chair this year of the East Asian Summit. This is the 5th meeting of the East Asian Summit, but it's the first one an American president has been willing to attend. To be able to attend it, we had to sign the Treaty of Amity and Commerce in the region, and that was done by Mrs. Clinton a while back. So the administration now is really focused on trying to sell to the American people that it has done something new, different, and important in the Asia-Pacific region. And this will take President Obama to the Pacific for almost 10 full days, which is a remarkably long amount of time for any president to commit. APEC started back in the late 1980s and was intended to be a meeting to improve the terms of trade among the partners in trade and finance in the Western Pacific and among some Latin countries, Chile, Peru, Mexico, the US, Canada, on this side of the Pacific, and then most everybody on the other side. And they had some initial good starts. In the Clinton administration, the leaders meeting was added, so it wasn't just ministers of commerce and finance, but also the presidents and prime ministers from the various countries got together. And in 1996, they made a big effort to expand free trade in the Asia-Pacific, the so-called Bogor Initiative when Indonesia was hosting at that time. That fell on hard times right away because of the Asian financial crisis. And APEC has been making marginal inroads on trade and economic issues since then, but it has not had any home runs to hit out of the park, just grinding away. The Australian visit is important because it's part of the rectification of America's alliance posture in East Asia. We've had a lot of tensions in Japan because when American bases first went into Okinawa, the southern end of Japan, there's virtually no people there, but it's filled out. And it's harder to exercise without trampling on farmers' fields or disturbing urban populations. So there's been back pressure to reduce exercises. But you need to exercise your military to keep them effective. So, an agreement has been reached behind the scenes for the United States to regularly access wide open spaces in northern and northwestern Australia to exercise with Australians and by ourselves, depending on the circumstances. And that will be announced when the president gets to Australia. Now, some will say this is part of the American effort to strengthen its alliance structure against a rising China. And I suppose you can't say it has nothing to do with a rising China, but in fact it's got more to do with better management, better organization of our alliance structure in the region. Australia is a full 8 hours farther away than Japan is by air, let alone by sea. So it's not as if we're trying to get in China's face by exercising in Australia. So I hope that people won't draw too stark an anti-China conclusion out of this small announcement that will come from the state visit. The East Asian Summit is not a duplicate of APEC. APEC is economic and finance, and the East Asian Summit has been represents an effort by the countries of the region to find some natural architecture on which to build, sort of the way the European Union started with the coal and steel community years back, then the European community, and then eventually European Union. They think eventually something like that will happen in Asia. It may take a long time, but the first step forward is this East Asian Summit. The U.S. did not want to be excluded, and the Singaporeans, Australians, and others didn't want to exclude the U.S. from that part of the world or themselves. And so finally, this president, Obama, has agreed to participate. There's a hope that this will become an alternative to the economic focus in APEC. This one will become the security focus. Up to now, the agendas have not been about security, they've been finance, disease, humanitarian issues. But President Obama's forerunners organizing this have been trying to get some minimum agreement among all the parties to non-proliferation restatements of concern and principle, building some commitments and agenda for the future, and building out the capacity so some of the small states can be helpful in non-proliferation. And the same is also a goal on maritime security. Maritime security being concern about piracy in the main choke points for maritime trafficking, but also the tensions that have arisen over conflicting territorial claims, not just in the South China Sea, but also in the East China Sea and the Yellow Sea. And so there's a lot there. But that set of issues, because of all these disputes, is more sensitive and maybe harder to reach minimum agreement on restating principles, on building an agenda, and on building capacity to deal with it. My guess is they'll end up doing a lot on humanitarian rescue and emergency relief. In Indonesia, the president will hold the second of his summits with the leaders of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. He did another one of these earlier. It's a chance for them to talk about their common concerns and give them some face as a founding organization within Southeast Asia. The issues involved are much less in scope, partly because it's a more tightly defined terrain. There are things there like the Southern Mekong Initiative, which Secretary Clinton has taken up, which is an effort to rally resources and technical advice to help better manage the lower Mekong Valley, where shortages of water have become severe, partly because of drought, partly because of damming upstream in Laos and China, the Mekong River. It's interrupted the flow of fishes and the daily lives of a lot of people who live along the Mekong. So that won't make big headlines in the U.S., but it is a worthwhile objective. Well, President Obama will have two summit meetings during the course of this visit to the Pacific, and will have just met with China's President Hu Jintao in France for the G20 meeting. So there'll be quite a lot of summitry. President Hu Jintao will also come to the APEC meeting in Honolulu, but it'll be the Premier of China, Wen Jiabao, who will go to the East Asian Summit in Bali, Indonesia. It's been a good thing for the U.S. and China to have had these periodic leaders meetings. When leaders are involved, they become action-forcing events. It tends to make bureaucracies toe the line, try to get out positive and constructive results. The goals here are not great, but just staying in touch and talking about difficult things is an important forerunner to what next year will be a very difficult year. China is going through its 18th Party Congress, and even though it's not like a wide open election, it certainly has its own internal strains. In the United States, we'll have a presidential and congressional elections, South Korea, Taiwan, there are a host of things. And leaders staying in touch and agreeing on a few common principles and agreeing to follow up on them helps to get you through more turbulent years such as we face next year. Well, U.S. policy on Asia is a significant step up from what it was. I mean, there's a continuity. The Bush administration didn't forget about Asia, but they did miss a few meetings, and for that reason were thought to have other priorities. And the Obama administration has been trying to convey to the Asians that we're very serious in our involvement in the region, and we're going to be staying there and making the meetings. But that doesn't change our base structure, really. It doesn't change the alliance structure, the partnerships we have. Obviously, one of the big things that's going to emerge for public consumption out of these visits is jobs, jobs, jobs. The administration will want to say that what they're doing with APEC, following the signing of the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement, is to try to break down doors to trade in the region and to promote trans-Pacific partnerships. 9 countries total, maybe a 10th. Japan may join in, but hasn't decided yet. Into a free trade arrangement that would really deepen and widen the existing free trade arrangements the U.S. has with parties from Singapore to Chile to Australia and New Zealand, and see if they can't broaden it. The result could be very good, but it's not going to be an immediate result. But certainly when the president's spending 10 days in sun-filled Pacific climates, it'll be a good reminder to the American people that he is working on jobs, and I think that's what a lot of people will be hearing from each of the stops he makes.